So just because you can doesn't mean you should. As you can see, this amuses me. This is catch a tiger by the tail, right? Which if you're familiar or not with the idiom, to explain it, it means to pursue something too difficult to manage or that might turn on you, which I thought was appropriate for some of these projects. But in our case, it's a little tiger, so maybe we're all right. So I'd like to get a sense real quick, who is in the audience, just so I can tailor a little bit. How many are software engineers? Nice, okay, good. Anyone in product management? Okay. In project management or other IT? Okay, wonderful, thank you for that. So, as I said, thank you for joining this afternoon. I came up with the idea, oops, I'm gonna keep forgetting that, just. I came up with the idea for this session today based on a recent project I was on. It started out, I was brought on to do a virtual reality project. It was a software that took some interesting turns from its origin as a virtual reality product. And so I felt it was representative of how I've seen many of these emerging tech projects go. I've had the opportunity, as Pete said, over the years working with a wide range of new and novel technologies. And while it's exciting to discuss the possibilities of a given technology, the tech itself is just a capability. It's not a product in and of itself. So I thought I might share some thoughts on how to decide what tech to use when addressing a different market need, as well as some of the differences between managing these types of products versus managing ones that are novel or less novel. So less novel technical solutions, I meant. So to be clear, there are a lot of engineers in the room. I was formerly a developer. This is not a technical talk. And it's also not about a big picture. When you say just because you can doesn't mean you should, you could really be talking about in general, like should we be doing this as a society, you know, like this big picture stuff. And it's really not about that, of whether the emerging technology is worth pursuing from a social perspective or implications. Those are interesting conversations, but not always actionable. So my goal for today is simply to offer some ideas that you can have in the back of your mind if you're ever involved in a relevant project that kind of fits this mark of being somewhat complex with new technology. Boom. So before I dive in, that's me by the way, I wanted to share a recent VR or simulation story that I thought was somewhat interesting and ties in. Everyone can hear me? Okay, good. So a personal detail about me is that I love to fly. In particular, the small single prop plane that you see there, that's a Piper Warrior. If you know anything about these planes, they're from like the 50s and they just keep swapping stuff out. So at some point, the only thing that's still from the 50s is the shell, but you know, they're little tiny planes. It's freeing, it's wonderful views, and there's a solid technical skill component that feeds my inner nerd. So I do enjoy that. Now, I don't have a license. It usually takes people 18 months to a year to get a private pilot's license. So to give an indication, I, however, have been a student for over 10 years. So long, in fact, that the school I go to changed owners. I used to be able to do a touch and goes, which is where you take off, do a little spin around and fly, and just whenever I want it, just come in, easy breezy. But they changed the curriculum when the owners changed, something to do with the FAA, and started bugging me for ground classwork learning, so I wasn't too thrilled about that. At one point, I actually got in a fight with an argument with the owner who was trying to convince me to do, you know, and pay for class time on the ground. And I didn't want to hear it, and he said, well, we have this wonderful new simulator that we got. It's $200,000, we bought it last year, it's really awesome, you'll love it, and it'll get you your ground time. And I was like, nah. And so I wasn't concerned with that. I wasn't concerned with getting a license, because at the end of the day, nothing beats flying when it's a beautiful day out, right? Until back in September this year, I was in a car accident. Look at this. There you go. Until that, right? So back in September, I was in a car accident. Anyone who's from Philly? Is anyone from the area? Okay, so this was on Kelly Drive, if you're familiar. It's a very windy, highly trafficked road. And it had just started raining. I was driving home, and the car hydroplaned. And if anyone's in that situation, you know that you don't want to slam your brakes, or you're just going to lose control. So instead, I started struggling to gain control by just going into the swerve, aggressively. And I was able to do that to slow the car down significantly before hitting the median. The airbag is deployed, as you may or may not be able to see, but I was fine. walked away, actually. I got a new car, I needed a new one. It was a very old car. It was like a 12-year-old little crap car, and basically just moved on with my life. Okay, sure. About a month later, I went to take another flight lesson because, I like to do it. I do it casually, but okay, okay. We had a little turbulence, and I was never afraid of that before. And like I said, I've been doing this off and on for 10 years. But I started to panic. More than the fear of the problem with the plane itself mechanically, I was freaking out that I was going to overcorrect for the turbulence. So when you're flying a plane, who here is anybody a pilot? Okay. So when you're flying, it's kind of set it and forget it. You're just correcting mildly. You're not kind of wigging around turning. Oh, do you? Okay. Well, you know far more than me. I'm just kind of dabbling and then come back up. But I was afraid I was going to overcorrect just because I was having a panic attack. The reaction was absolutely irrational. But I was flashing back to that turning of the wheel when I was hydroplaning. It was weird. Totally unexpected response weeks later. And I find that completely fascinating. The human mind is just fascinating. So in comes that lovely simulator I was so quick to dismiss. Okay? As you can see here, I have the pictures. It's kind of hard for me to work out. You can see the back of it. Let me see if I can get the video. Probably not. No, it says permission, so I'm not going to do it. But you can see it's fairly immersive and realistic. And I also found out that the system can simulate turbulence. So I got the idea that I could use this with the turbulence, and the instructor was cracking up because we put it up like, let's go to 6, 7, 8, just like raising the turbulence on this thing because it actually jostles around. And I could experience desensitizing myself to the turbulence over time so then it wouldn't be a problem anymore. I thought that was a good use for that. And it also hit the fact that now I'm going to have some ground time, so I don't have to get complaints from the owner. Right? So I can do that. When I did go off, it was interesting. I actually experienced sweaty palms, and on a couple occasions I grabbed the controls, just like I would have in the plane. So I find that very interesting as an approach to solving that problem. So what I find fascinating is that my interest in using that software and that system, that simulator, shifted so dramatically when my goal shifted. Right? From both a learning and enjoyment perspective, there's no comparison to actually flying the plane, right? That's what I want to be doing. That's my goal, right? But when learning to fly changed to retrain my reaction to turbulence, the simulator became a much more viable option for me. And so the diagram you see here, is anyone familiar with this model? It's a theory, the task, technology, fit. Some of these have been around a long time. You pull them up to kind of make your point. But the diagram here is a model for assessing the technology's capabilities in relation to its user's task. It's pretty straightforward. Some of this stuff, you boil it down, you're like, yeah, obviously, right? But like most models, they seem obvious, but nonetheless are a reliable approach to understanding performance impact and utilization. So you take the user's goals or requirements, you evaluate it against the functions or characteristics of the technology or limitations of the tech, and you'll improve the user's performance and increase system use. So that's the little theory there. Okay. Now in my case with the flying, this model was my goal to learn to fly, so that should fit. But it also fit before the car accident. I didn't want anything to do with it at that point. So I think it's really useful to consider that a task technology fit is not a complete picture by any stretch of the imagination. Task characteristics also need to live within the context of people's shifting goals and motivations. And even when performing the most rote, mundane, repetitive tasks, the less tangible human aspects and complexity that needs to be addressed, right? So for example, how do you know what tasks and goals really are? Particularly within a sophisticated work stream, such as those with like education or training, which is a case study that I have for today. Or how do you evaluate a technology between its ecosystem of the market, other systems, your organization's ability to implement, things like that. So coming up with the idea of like, does this fit our goal, isn't enough. It's not a complete enough picture for the situation. And I thought I'd use that little story to explain that a bit. Okay, so. Why is this so difficult then? So to take that apart a little bit, okay. At this point, and we talked a little bit about my background to give you some insight of how I developed this particular perspective. Yeah, I'm there. I started in fine art, of all things, painting. because I was going to make a whole lot of money as a painter. Moved into software development. Specifically, I was a LAMP developer. I did a lot of prototype work out in Cupertino, and worked with the new tech stuff, which had its own process. And then as a consultant, I started working with new products. So many, many new products with many different companies and clients, because I'm an independent consultant. So it's not like I'm 3 years on a gig. It's, you come in, you work with different products and different teams. At some point, as you go through team after team, product after product, and being brought in to do the new stuff, I started to think to myself, why do so many of these clients with smart, experienced people, large teams, who create new products all the time, why do they struggle so much with these novel, or at least to them, or emerging technology projects? Why, when they have sophisticated processes for researching markets, scoping development efforts, making a business case, they know how to do this. So why is it so hard for these novel products? Why do the products consistently go off the rails, and more problematically, get cut entirely, even when internally there's a genuine interest in innovation, right? We want to do this, cool stuff, we want to do it, but it just gets canned time and time again, and it happens. It's like, why? So that's what I spent a lot of time thinking about, and it's kind of the crux of the talk going into it. So let's talk about what we're up against. Now, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly. It is a Welsh term, and it's called Canavan. Who here is familiar with the Canavan framework? Okay, I thought more, okay, interesting. So this framework, this will help tell you what you're up against when you're looking at a project with a certain level of complexity, right? The basic idea here is that the model is a sense-making model for how to manage a situation based on your context. It's a well-known framework and with some useful applications in different, it's not a software framework, it's just in any kind of environment. In fact, if you look down here at the chaotic, you're looking at disasters, you're looking at fires, you're looking at, wow, the stairway we just, we're gonna go down, just caved in, now what are we gonna do next, right? So that's like a chaotic. Moving back from that, you get to the complex, which I'll be talking about, is which you have a lot of unknowns. You don't really know what the process is to get to a result. You work back to complicated, whereas you know how to fill in the gaps, A, B, C, and D, but it takes some expertise to do so. And then you have simple, which is basically you don't need expertise, it's just checking off. If it was flight, you have like a flight checklist. I did it. Is there gas in this tank? Sure. Is there this? Check, 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 check. So this framework is really helpful to understand potentially why you would be struggling with something that otherwise you think you're not. It's another use for this too is if you're doing estimations, right? So if you're trying to estimate software and you say to yourself, wow, every time we try to do an estimate for this, we just tank it. Why? What's going on? Probably because you've misunderstood the complexity level, right? You weren't really understanding at that time or fully acknowledging what you were up against. So that's the framework. And so this is what I came to the conclusion. Or to the hypothesis of that, complex means unpredictable, right? And so what seems apparent to me now, but took some time to pinpoint, is that most of these IT projects that I'm working with that are not new tech are largely based off of past projects. So new billing system, a new CRM, a customer management portal, you name it, there's a framework we already are aware of. We knew what it was, we have a model. They require expertise. They need clear, usually sophisticated planning and processes, and there are dependencies that at various points in the process are high risk, working, where things can break down. So it's no small effort to do these complicated products. However, the product definition process is known, and its unknowns are known. We know what gaps we have to fill. We know what buckets we have to solve for. So if the process is followed, the results are reasonably predictable. Okay, we're going to get to the end. In my subspecialty in UX, most projects work this way. You have discussion with stakeholders, you have user interviews, you create personas, workflows, yada, 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 down to testing and so forth. And so these are best for mid-career subject matter and specialty experts with proven product managers who've managed products before. Those are the clients that struggle with these new products. And that's what was catching me off, because the expertise is there. These are smart people doing interesting things. Why is this so tough? Designing emerging technology projects, or novel to the organization projects often, they're complex, they're not complicated. They fit into that unknown unknowns category. The product definition process itself will need to be developed in real time as you gain more context and guiding information. That's the difference, right? So you'll only know what the correct steps were in retrospect. Get used to being uncomfortable, right, is what that is. So let's see where we're at. Moving into that, I have a case study that kind of shows that and illustrates it better than the conversation would do of just talking about it. But I just wanted to put this up here. Why emerging technology? A lot of times I'll go into clients, oh, we want to do this. You know, we want to have our brand show that we're forward thinking and we're promoting the tech. We want to enter into the market. We want to be, you know, up with the competition. There are many reasons why these emerging tech projects get pushed or kind of get brought up in an organization. And so some are up there. All are relevant to some degree, but few have anything to do with buyer or user needs, right? So I find that interesting because you kind of, there's so many, someone's enamored of stuff. This happens more often than you'd like to admit, that somebody's just really in love with virtual reality and wants to make a career out of that and just starts forwarding with the organization. I've seen that with all different types of tech. So just that's another part of knowing what you're up against. I also pulled up this Gartner hype cycle. Is everyone familiar with this? Raise a hand if who've seen this. They have these going back to 2000, and I went down a rabbit hole the other day just looking back of like, well, where was VR? Okay, where was this tech? Like all the different techs are just kind of popping back and forth along this thing. It doesn't tell you too much. It's a good indication of what people are talking about, which is what it's intended to be. I've pointed out that it may be obvious, but these technologies, again, are not products, and therein lies a big sticky wicket because it's not telling you what the context of use is or how, you know, it's going to be packaged into anything. A lot of times when I speak with clients, the conversations are, here's our context, here's the technology we want to use, that'll mean a product. No, it doesn't. A well-designed product may utilize a given technology within it, but it needs to hang together for a grouping of related business or customer needs. And that involves looking at a much bigger picture. And I'm not going to go into this into detail, but here's an example of many areas that you need to look in when designing a new product or making a business case. And very little of it, only one component of it has to do with the technical application itself. A lot of it has to do with market gap, all the other things. Let's see. Your company and your ability to deliver, the buyers, the users, the social and cultural context, so all that fun stuff. Boom. Okay. All right. So moving from that, kind of giving the kind of broad view of what's involved and why these projects are so complicated, I'm going to walk you through not really the details or the technology of the product itself, but a case that I was involved in, a project I was involved with that just, it was very interesting in terms of its flow. It was very representative of these kind of complex projects, right? Boom. So it's in medical education. Okay. So I was brought in for early stage research into a new medical education product for a global brand. Specifically, the product focused on clinical skills education. At the get-go, I was brought in to do a virtual reality or augmented reality implementation. That was the title of the project, right? Like that's what we were intending to do. The mandate was why do we want to do this? Because we want to be innovative, right? And this is pushing the brand forward. We really want to put money down on this. Customers are asking for this stuff, and the competition is already doing it. So those are the reasons of why this is going to be a virtual reality product. It's going to be wonderful. We looked in at the very early stages of this. It's a very highly saturated market. Anything with medical, med ed is just incredibly saturated in terms of its players and its landscape. There's a lot of virtual patients. I could literally just Google virtual patients. Do I have this guy up there? Oh, that's Pediatric Hal, which like, this guy annoys me. This thing looks so scary to me. Very, very sophisticated simulation, very high cost, you know, for the kind of long tail of the buyer, but you could just Google and just get a million different virtual patients and stuff like that. In addition, this company had also made 3 previous attempts at a virtual reality sim product with various levels of success. So that's the tee-up of the project itself. So being brought in, I came in a couple months after the project had started, simply as a timing issue, and began midstream in the first discovery research phase. The team had spoken with educators and administrators at major institutions, pulled secondary research, look at market trends, all that fun stuff. They had vast amounts of information, as you would expect for a healthcare-related market, right? There's just a lot of data, a lot of research, a lot of money that's get thrown in it, government, you name it. And so we pulled all that. It's wonderful. Literally at one point they were so broad in their view, they had Snell vision at one point up on like a real-time board. Like, okay, sure. I don't even think they weren't serious. They're like, maybe we were doing that. And you come in and it's like, well, what do we do with all of this information? We did learn MedEd will be a $38 billion business by 2024. Great. A good portion of that is going to be clinical skills, right? So it's a really good directional area. We knew from a business perspective we wanted to be in that crowded space, but where within it? Where's the gap within that? What's the differentiator? Where's the in for us, and what's the plan, right? And so that was that broad information we were looking at. And what we came up with, which was interesting, and this is a well-known thing because there's a lot of data about that, is that the gap at this point currently is a struggle to teach soft skills, right? Whether you're a nurse or an EMT or a doctor, you can get the science down, you can get the mechanics of providing care, but one of the big challenges is how do you deal with somebody who's freaking out, right? How do you deal with somebody that is argumentative? How do you deal with somebody who has dementia? Like there's a whole world of things that have to do with the soft skills associated with this. So we found this out. Some products are out there, but they're not in a clear way. There's no patterns in the market for that, and that's a clear indicator of a gap. The wealth of academic research and R&D models are there. You know, there's a lot of people putting a lot of money in it, but again, no implementation standards. That pings a red flag, right? So armed with this insight, we moved into a second, more focused area of research, right? I don't know where we are for time, so okay. So the second round, what do I have here? Learning outcomes, yeah, okay. So the second round was fairly distinct, right? So it's not like it bled into it. We kind of took a pause, looked at it and said, okay, what are we gonna do next? The first round provided us this broad information, gave us some hypotheses in terms of gap, but really, we wanted to move more targeted into the soft skills. That's one of the reasons it was distinct. And the second is we started using some user-centered design methodologies to sort out user and buyer groups. Their goal is to get a better picture of the problems they're trying to solve and potentially the frustrating aspects, problems trying to solve. Some of the frustrating aspects of this type of pivot, and I've seen it happen again and again, it's like we were starting in one area, we were doing virtual reality, we're gonna do a clinical case, now we're going down this idea of soft skills and potentially empathy and all this different stuff. It feels like a really big pivot. And a lot of times organizations start losing an appetite, right? They start going, oh, okay, we're all over the place. Not necessarily, it's actually part of the process. And so there's a lot of time doing the same activity but looking for different content, right? So we're still doing different research, you know, we're still interviewing people, we're still pulling research. What are y'all doing, right? Like why is this still going on? If you were to workflow this at a high level, it would look like we're moving in a circle instead of targeting in. So a key thing that we found specific to this project is that, and most of these are, again, only obvious in retrospect, is that the learning outcomes for anything in any kind of medical education or even any education is far more important than the technology that drives it or provides it. It seems obvious, but conversation, that's not the conversation, right? The conversation is always about the tech. It's really about the learning outcome, always. It's always about the goal of what you're trying to achieve. And so educator and student expectations were not as pre-formatted or pre-formulated as we thought, which was good. So where do we go from here? We did all this broad research. Everybody's kind of like, well, now you've moved on, what's going on? And I'll tell you, at this point in the project, and it happens a lot of times with these types of projects, the team was stuck. We didn't know where to go. It's like we have all this information, we have all this data. There's this idea of fear of missing out. We don't want to get rid of anything, right? Because maybe we're wrong. We don't have enough information for that. And we started to feel real analysis paralysis, right? Where do we go from here and how would we get there? There were still questions and doubt about soft skills direction in general. And now that we found a more open space in the market, like what would a product like that look like? There are analogies to kind of virtual patients, but what's this thing look like where we're teaching the soft skills? And that's something totally, something else. So actually, that place where you're totally overwhelmed with information but have a good lead is a good place to be because that is where innovation lies, right? That's where you're going to find something you can actually use that's different, that's going to put you in a better position. But it's the most uncomfortable place to be in because you don't know where to go. So that's the kind of hurdle. If you ever did water skiing where you have like a wake and you got to get over the wake and get smooth, I don't know, kind of just on the fly give that analogy, but it's that kind of thing where you have to go through the pain of doing that to get something useful. So from here, how do we know what to include or exclude? When do we know when we're done? How do we, validate when we've included something? Okay. Well, you know how we did it? We made it up, right? How do you do that? I'll tell you. We got bold and we made something up. At the end of the day, and this is really uncomfortable for people, but product concept is a bit of a leap of faith. It's a creative process, right? It's not just numbers and data points. It's a creative process, right? You have to put something into it to get something out of it. So we still take a strategic approach, right? We're still going to, be metered. We're still going to get data. We're still going to interview and all that kind of stuff. But, you're really kind of putting something together. We knew it was some kind of cat, right? That's what we knew. But we picked the parts we liked. We picked the parts we thought would be interesting and kind of cobbled together something like this. When I put this slide together, I kind of like the look of that cat, but I was thinking it was like Frankenstein's monster, but it wasn't because it was never intended, this product or concept was never intended to go live. No going in with this type of thing, it's not something to ever see the light of day on purpose, right? Because you're strategically trying to develop something to get a reaction to turn it into something else. And so we pushed the envelope with it, plausible but reaching. We storyboarded a narrative. This was about a product story. No code was written at this point. Initially, I started with two concepts, one really out there and one a little less, and we found out, let's just do the really out there one and we'll get to the other one. That was a big learning there. And then, we did a well thought through, well written, but low fidelity materials, right, for testing. So, look how fancy, right? There's this site, it's called Storyboard That. Has anybody heard of that tool? Yeah. So I've started using this in different contexts just because of how easy it is to do. You just kind of get these little characters and put them in. It's our fancy little product demo. It's Storyboard That. As far as the narrative, it was of this woman, Maya. She's a third-year medical student walking through her clinical skills education as she uses a product. You can see she's doing something on the train. She interacts with patients. She does some VR headset stuff. But ultimately, this was recorded as a little video, as a movie, as you kind of see through the different things. I actually sat up at night, like re-recording this like 50 times because I was the narrator, right? And I did that because we tested it with multiple educators. And I didn't want to have to say the same thing like for 8 minutes, 20 times over, right? So that's how it was. We were able to create the video very quickly, and we showed it to a bunch of participants in a qualitative study to kind of cycle through. We spoke with educators armed with a product demo, and what's interesting is that's what got us off the ground, right? That's what got us out of that drowning in the, different analogies here, but drowning in the data, right? Patterns started to emerge. Wait a minute, are we on to something, right? Some things were immediately knocked out of the running. Other things evolved, and we were able to build a case for or against it. We did have a case where it was like, oh, virtual reality is so exciting. She's going to use this, that, and the other thing. Yet no one could articulate an actual learning objective-based need for the virtual reality. It just wasn't there. We probed, we tried. Do I have it in here? Yeah, right? So one of the things I try to do at this level of concept testing is I try to get people to advocate and fight me for the product feature, right? So I say, well, this is going to be really expensive. It's going to add to the product. We're having this conversation. You think we get rid of it? Let's just ditch it, right? That'll be fine. We don't need this. And what I'm looking for, and we didn't get for the VR, but we did for voice assistant or voice interaction, is they start to fight for it. Well, no, here's why we need this. And because it's going to do this, this, and this, and right now we're dealing with something else, right? So they really start to get in that. When you have that, you know you have something to look into a little bit further. Now you have something that you're going to flesh out as opposed to do we need it or not? Because you have people actively advocating for it. If you say, do you like this? People are going to tell you, yeah, I like that, I want that, right? But if you try to take it away and they fight for it, that's something more interesting. Okay. Why did that not? Okay, good. So from there we went and refined the story. Okay. Definitely removed the VR component. We added some mobility and collaboration stuff. The voice component was was really, really important. I find it interesting. We did try, and this did not work well. We tried to refine this as a design sprint. Most of the project cycles I come in are all pre-agile. It's all kind of early stage. It's really not a tech project at that point, right? It's a business project. We did try to incorporate that. It was too soon. We just didn't have enough tangible tech information to be able to drive something like that, or technology requirement information. We did get a solid clinical test case, and what we found is that, like anything else, the story is king, right? That's what's going to sell it, is the clinical cases. And so, looking at the different things, we found that the machine learning, maybe we need that, maybe we don't. So we definitely had a direction, and so we went into a different round of research to say, okay, do we need these things? Voice recognition and synthesis. So the next step from that, where was I? Is to simulate, right? That was the decision made. We wouldn't have known all that. We didn't know we were going down this path. People were like, well, what are y'all working on now? Why? Oh, now you're simulating a little voice app. Okay, cool. Like, how did that turn into that? Because weren't we going to do a virtual reality project that had something like that was just a known issue? No. So based on our findings and direct feedback from the research participants, we decided to create a simulation of just the voice component, right? Basically, the conversation with educators started to really focus. They kept asking questions about how that would work. Well, would it do this? Would it do that? And it started to get really deep, and we're like, we don't know, you're telling us, kind of. You know what I mean? Like, it was an inverse process where they got excited and started asking answers we didn't have. And so we wanted to look at how that would work and achieving an improvement on the current methods to meet those learning objectives with with teaching these students these skills. If you go back to that kind of in complex category, right, the framework, all of this, again, is only known in retrospect. We didn't know this is what we'd be building. If you were trying to scope this out as a consultant and saying, like, okay, we're going to do A, B, and C, you'd get hosed on that financially, right? Because you'd be doing a bunch of different projects. You'd have to keep going back and saying, well, we need more money for this, we need more money for that. And so it's one of those things where you have to plan ahead, knowing this is the type of project you're working on going in, and structure it with small steps. I'm kind of off the rails right now, but okay. So we did. Basically, it just so happened, there's Web Speech API. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's kind of neat. I've been playing around a lot with it. Apparently, I built an app with it. I haven't developed it in a long time, but I did for that. So we looked at this free open source framework. We were able to create, using that same kind of crappy graphics, but something that would reasonably model what the cadence would be in the conversation. Totally smoke and mirrors. One developer, me, just sitting there kind of working it out, because it's not a major scope and it's a throwaway, right? We're just trying to figure out, like, how's this going to work? I actually put in answers, right? Like, it's not real machine learning. It's just to kind of show enough so we can put it in front of students, we can put it in front of educators, and they go, oh yeah, that would work, that would be interesting, or that's not enough, right? So we're trying to level set in terms of, like, how sophisticated do we need to be. And so the output is highly targeted. And I've done this before in different scenarios, not just with the voice stuff. We've done that actually with another voice project to say we've done, but you can do it in different contexts. You just don't know what you're going to be building at the time. Okay. So at that point, once we did that for testing, we moved to a proof of concept. You can do an MVP or proof of concept. If you're dealing with new tech, obviously you're going to go with the proof of concept. Can we do it? If so, what's the best way? Insights on how to scale such a thing versus is the product viable? We're not even at a product level yet. This is a subcomponent, right, to understand. Okay. So that's the case study of the project, and you can see it just goes it's not random, it's intentional, but you don't know where you're going. It's unknown unknowns, right? And you start to fill that in and you look back and you're like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. Of course it went that way. You didn't know that going in. We didn't know that we were going to even have the open API that was going to be able to do that so inexpensively. There's like a million variables you just don't know, and you have to be comfortable with that. I'm kind of giving my takeaways ahead of time, but okay. So, as you can see, So the steps to build a solid business case. More often than not, you're going to go into a large company and they're going to have a very formal process. Is that we do this, we're going to look at our options, we're going to evaluate each of the options, we're going to do plus and minus of that, cost evaluation, and we're going to subset and look at these two and bring it down to one in this logical orderly process. This doesn't work like that for these complex projects. It's never going to work that way because you're going back and forth and up and down. The only way to achieve anything on that is to separate it from that business case process, know that it's a research and development option, time box it, have it with a smaller team, and know that you're going through that. Boop. I don't know where we are for time. Okay. So some process insights, and I just run through some of these. I'm happy to answer questions about it, have a conversation about it. But for the process of going through, it will take longer than you think. It's important to keep this low cost. So small teams with highly skilled folks who are highly focused and empowered to change as needed. You know going in, they're going to pivot, they're going to move, and just let that go as long as they're focused on of that end objective of meeting that, filling that gap or meeting that user need or business need. If they're doing that, they're still doing what they need to be doing. They're not off the rails. They're just in that process. It will deviate from your existing business case or product management process. You will not know what additional subject matter experts or expertise you will need at the start, but you will need them. You will chase down dead ends and explore interesting rabbit holes. It's just part of that process. It's why I like it. It's why it's a fun process. I've learned over the course of doing this stuff just so much random information that I just tuck away and then bring out for some other project. It's interesting. You'll triangulate eventually and innovate an approach that is data supported and buyer and user vetted. And that's your win right there, is that eventually you will triangulate on something that is actual innovation, not just the word. It's something new, it's something different, and it's something that you have reasonable indication that it's going to fit that need. And then also taking a step back, looking at the process, that the process itself is you can't replicate. But you can structure teams in an organization to be comfortable with and adapting to that complex project cycle. So then, I think it's roughly finally. So product insights. Of course, and you hear this all the time, but it's true, fall in love with the problem. That's what's going to keep you on focus. If you love that problem and the best way to solve it instead of the technology or whatever secondary, you'll be fine. User buyer driven, like I said, but it's okay to have a hunch. And that's the thing, you either go one way or the other. It's going to be all data, we don't want to have an opinion, or there's too much opinion. It's a little bit of both. You have to have a hunch. When we made that tiger, or that cat, or whatever that was, I mean, we had to draw a line in the sand. We had to have an opinion about doing that. So start with strong research-driven assumptions and refute them along the way through sound methodologies. Push the envelope with the concept, but use the lowest fidelity possible to adequately articulate the concept. And this is where the innovation lies. So, okay. Finally, last thing I want to say about the kind of end result. If you walk away with anything else, I will say this: go big, right? Even if you have to walk it back, and you will, keep your discovery process lightweight, low cost, but go there, right? Go beyond, having, you'll get a solid iterative approach, but consider that most of us in technology got into it for a reason, myself included. We believe in its power, right? The capacity for impact, to change lives, and to do cool things. A runoff effect of going big and going for some far-flung, wild idea is that it will excite and inspire. This is a runoff, but you're going to get somewhere with it. These are the projects that keep and retain the best thinkers, absolutely. And of course the team will see the evolution to something more realistic, but it makes a strong statement about your company's culture and commitment to innovation that you're willing to tolerate that level of risk and uncomfortability and double down on that and go big with it. So that's my final thing with that. That's all I have. Did I do that? There you go. And so if there are any questions and answers, I'll give answers, hopefully. But if there are any questions, let me know. What did I do? Oh, okay. There you go.
And then can you flip it to Salon D in the upper right hand corner?
I was like, I don't know what 8 years of data taking is. I think I won't answer that question. That's like when it's Cards Against Humanity and I'm like uncomfortable with it. I'm like, next. I just like pull another card. Oh, yes.
What would be your advice for trying to get the natural culture to that business plan that's sort of averse to the iteration you're describing that's necessary to really triangulate?
Yeah.
That's really probably the biggest challenge
Sure.
for anybody who's trying to encourage people to adopt what amounts to a massive culture shift.
Yep.
So what would be your advice?
So, yeah. So much of that are soft skills. So much of those are conversations. So much of those are having very tiny, small baby wins and saying, if we get, and I've done this, I've actually sat in meetings where I am being, and when I say argue, it's all fun, you know what I mean? It's not like, angry arguments, but just toe to toe, we're not gonna do this isn't gonna work, we tried this before. The big one is we've tried this before, right? And I have absolutely said that just play along. And here's that, I don't need you to play along to the end, I just need you to play along to here. Right? So find a thing you know you can achieve on. I know that if we do this one little piece, it doesn't cost a lot, that we'll get there. And say, I have no problem putting myself on the line to say, if we get here and we haven't achieved what I say, we'll cut the whole thing, that's fine. But just play along to here. That's how I do that, right? And then, all right, and you would find by the third play along, you don't have to ask anymore. Right? You kind of, they're like, oh, okay, cool, where's this gonna go? Depending. And then you just expand that. Did that help?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Trickery always works.
What? Absolutely, no, yeah. I think it's just having the confidence to know that you're gonna get to where you're going, and being able to subset that and understand that it makes sense for them to be averse to that risk. I mean, people's jobs can be on the line, a lot of money can be on the line, it makes sense. So having a little bit of, we talked about empathy briefly, but having a little bit of empathy of like what people are looking at in terms of the budgets and what's on the line for them, and tracking back that or pulling back that risk a little bit is helpful, so looking at it that way. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I think you talked about low fidelity and
Yes.
when doing these experiments or doing initial product analysis.
Yeah.
Are there any techniques you recommend, like quantitative experiments or any particular design techniques that are low fidelity but effective?
I think it's absolutely tied to who you're talking to and what you're trying to get out of it. I mean, so for example, that voice thing was really low fidelity, but we needed it to be at least interactive enough to go through. So it's very much tied to that. But years back at Comcast, wherever, I've actually done paper prototypes, which is a well-known thing. You just put that in front of it. What's more important or most important is you know what you're trying to say, like you know what you're trying to get across, and you articulate that as well as possible given the context, and keep it small. You know what I mean? Like keep it tied to like, here's what we want to learn. Don't build all this other crap. Just, just build that one thing and test it. Go ahead.
Is there like a typical time period that you should go through with this design process or prototyping or like that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I struggle with that sometimes actually, because on the one hand, I mean, it's unrealistic to think you're just going to like flow through forever and kind of do that. So it is helpful to time box stuff and say, okay, we're going to have different pivots. If we go there, it's going to mean something else. I think you wouldn't take something, generally speaking, when I've done these projects that are somewhat complex, they still run about 3 to 6 months. Like they're not going into years. But that could change if you need to do some clinical, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. It's very context specific. Oh. Okay. Do you recommend changing the current service 50%? I do not have enough information to answer that question. That if half of your, is that a different question? I'm trying to understand. Say you have a service that only 50% of users will adopt. Do you recommend changing the current service that already works 50%? Creating a new service? I think I would need information to understand how they're using it, what the context is. I would need more information. I apologize to whoever said that. And you can see me and tell me more information like at the end of the talk.
You prove that you're meeting the business user's case or the client's case.
Yeah.
Do you use experimentation of any sort, or how do you prove that you're meeting their needs versus
So can you repeat that?
Do you have any numerical evidence that you're moving in the right direction? You're moving back and forth. I know there's maybe you want some assumptions that are emotional, that are you have to have opinions and stuff like you're saying. But is there a point where you have like metrics or data or
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So it's a combination of qualitative and quantitative data that you're pulling, right? And you use the quantitative to say like, how frequently does this happen, how large? And a lot of times we pivot back and forth. That's one of the things where you can't just plan it. If you do a project like Psycho, it's like, now we're going to do a survey, now we're going to do qualitative. That works in a complicated, non-complex project. But in a complex project, you might be switching that up. So in many cases, we've gone and done qualitative studies, right? We've had conversations with people and say, wait a minute, how often is this actually happening, right? We talked to 4 people saying this, because you're never going to get those numbers for qualitative. You don't need to. That's not the point. But you might find something in there that makes you go, we need to find that out. And then you go over, you do some sort of surveying, you pull some sort of data that might already be existing that tells you that quantity, that kind of thing. So it's definitely this balancing act back and forth. Because the point isn't about whether you're doing qualitative or quantitative. The point is, what's the solution here? What's going to track us close as we can to like what we need to be doing? Does that? Through a combination of just iterative tests.
how do you define that was good? Because sometimes, like, one thing is
Sure.
it's been driving profits to get more advertising revenue, but people become addicted. So how do they determine what's positive? Like, are we trying to help the user make sure they're not addicted to social media, or are we just trying to have ad revenue? So how does that define context?
So when you're asking how do you know if it's good, how is it good for society? Is that what you're saying?
Or just what do you define as good? Like, right, you're defining the definition of when you're trying to solve a problem, what do you define as the criteria for what, how you want to solve it?
I-
Different like approaches for certain outcomes that you want. How do you decide what outcomes you want? And how do you know, or what do you fall back on something when you see a certain outcome?
Okay, so I'm going to attempt to answer this. I don't have enough, it's very context specific, but that's such an easy way out. So I'm going to say this. If you're looking on how to make decisions, if you're doing the right thing for your company, you track it back to brand, always. You're not brand, not your logo, but your brand tenets, right? So if you look at any company with strong brand tenets, we do this, we don't do this. That's your guiding light, right? That's how you go back and say, are we going to be people that do this, right? Are we going to do this as a company? Okay, who are we? Right, so it's an identity issue. That sounds very broad, but it's how that gets done. If you look at a company, like, I don't want to say Apple, because I don't even know if they're doing that anymore. But if you look at some of these companies with very strong, well-articulate brand tenets, who then adhere to those tenets all the way downstream, you know it. It's a very obvious thing, and I'm not going to get into these certain spaces because it's not within those tenets. So if it's, for example, if you're founded on a principle that you are going to do good, which wasn't that Google for a while, right? Then there's certain things you're not going to do unless you're going to remove that as one of your brand tenets eventually, which they did, I think. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Anyone else? All right. Thank you all very much. Hopefully I provided some information that was useful.